Ambassador Sarah Chen walked into the Galaxy Council chambers for what would be the last time. Her footsteps echoed in the massive hall, where representatives from over 300 species gathered to discuss matters affecting the known galaxy. Today, however, she carried a message that would shake the very foundations of their civilization. The council chamber stretched for kilometers, with floating platforms accommodating beings of every imaginable shape and size. The Zephyrians floated in their gas-filled bubbles, while the crystalline Vortakians pulsed with soft light. The insectoid hive queens clicked their mandibles in rhythm, and the massive Goliath representatives sat like living mountains in their designated areas. Sarah took her place at the human platform, a modest structure compared to the elaborate displays of other species. Humans had always been seen as the newcomers, the species that arrived late to the galactic party. They had been part of the Council for only 50 Earth years, a blink of an eye compared to species that had been members for millennia. Council Prime Zelthior, a tall being with 4 arms and silver skin, called the session to order. His species, the Altarians, had led the Council for over 2,000 years. They prided themselves on their diplomatic skills and their ability to maintain peace across the galaxy. The Council recognizes Ambassador Chen of the Human Federation, Zelthior announced, his voice carrying across the chamber through universal translators. Sarah stood, her heart heavy with the weight of her mission. She had argued against this decision with her superiors, but the vote had been unanimous. Humanity was done. Honorable members of the Galaxy Council, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to announce. I stand before you today to deliver a formal notification from the Human Federation. The chamber fell silent. Even the usually chattering squeaker colonies went quiet, their tiny voices hushed in anticipation. Effective immediately, the Human Federation is withdrawing from all Galaxy Council activities, treaties, and agreements. We are severing all diplomatic, economic, and social ties with member species. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, chaos erupted. Impossible! Shrieked the Hive Queen Zaxth, her translation device barely keeping up with her rapid clicks and whistles. You cannot simply leave. There are procedures. The Vortakian representative, a being of pure crystal named Resonance of Stars, pulsed bright red with anger. This is unprecedented. No species has ever voluntarily left the Council. What about your obligations? Demanded Senator Korval of the Draconian Empire, his reptilian features twisted in disbelief. Your trade agreements? Your research partnerships? Your defensive pacts? Sarah waited for the shouting to die down before continuing. She had expected this reaction, but the sheer panic in their voices surprised her. All human personnel will be withdrawn from joint operations within 30 standard days. All trade agreements are hereby terminated. All research data sharing ends today. You cannot do this. Zelthior himself rose from his seat, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly. Think of what you're abandoning. Think of what the galaxy loses. We have thought about it, Sarah replied calmly. We've thought about little else for the past 5 years. The truth was, humanity had been planning this withdrawal since the incident at the Kepler station. That was when everything changed, when humanity realized exactly how the other species viewed them. 5 years ago, a joint research facility had been attacked by pirates from the Outer Rim. The station housed scientists from 12 different species, working on advanced technologies that could benefit everyone. When the pirates struck, the station's defenses failed, and the facility faced imminent destruction. The human research team, led by Dr. Michael Torres, had done what humans always did in a crisis. They improvised. Using spare parts and equipment scattered around the station, they built a makeshift defense grid. It wasn't pretty, and it definitely wasn't regulation, but it worked. The pirates were driven off, and everyone survived. Instead of gratitude, the Human Federation received a formal censure from the Galaxy Council. The Altarian-led investigation concluded that Dr. Torres and his team had violated 37 different safety protocols, used unauthorized modifications to Council equipment, and engaged in reckless endangerment of Council personnel. The fact that their actions had saved everyone's lives was deemed irrelevant to the procedural violations. That was the moment humanity understood they would never truly be accepted as equals in the galactic community. They were tolerated as useful newcomers, but their methods, their thinking, their very nature was seen as chaotic and dangerous. Ambassador Chen, pleaded Representative Zlix of the Merchant Guild Federation, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. Surely we can negotiate. What do you want? Better trade terms? Expanded territories? A permanent seat on the Security Committee? Sarah shook her head. This isn't about what we want. This is about what we are. We don't fit here. We never have. But the star charts! Exclaimed Navigator Prime Shental of the Explorers Consortium. Your species has mapped more new systems in 50 years than most species map in 500. You can't take that knowledge and leave. Actually, we can, Sarah replied. And we will. The panic in the chamber was palpable now. Representatives who had barely acknowledged humanity's presence for decades were suddenly realizing what was about to walk away. The medical advances, shouted Dr. Krelar of the Healers Alliance. Your species has revolutionized trauma treatment. The survival rates at emergency facilities have tripled since you shared your techniques. Your logistics networks, added Supply Master Vorth of the Resource Distribution Network. You move goods faster and more efficiently than anyone. The outer colonies depend on your supply lines. Your conflict resolution methods, cried Peacekeeper General Thax of the Council Defense Force. The Rimward Rebellion would still be raging if not for your negotiators. Sarah listened to the growing list with a mixture of sadness and vindication. For 50 years, these achievements had been dismissed as lucky accidents or crude but effective methods. Now, faced with losing them, the Council was finally admitting their value. We've made our decision, Sarah said firmly. All human colonies will be recalled to Federation space. All joint operations will cease. All technology sharing will end. But the Gateway Network, Zeltior's voice cracked with desperation. You maintain 60% of the galaxy's communication relays. Without your technicians, we'll lose contact with half the galaxy. This was true, and it was perhaps humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization. When humans had joined the Council, they had been appalled at the primitive state of galactic communications. It took weeks for messages to travel between distant systems, and the failure rate was enormous. Humanity had volunteered to upgrade the entire network. They built new relay stations, designed better transmission protocols, and established maintenance schedules that kept the system running smoothly. They had asked for nothing in return except the right to use the network for their own communications. Now that network would go dark. You'll figure something out, Sarah said with a shrug. You always do. The mining operations in the Scartus Belt, called out Mining Coordinator Grix of the Resource Extraction Union. Your asteroid miners pull in more rare minerals in a month than our operations manage in a year. The industrial sectors will collapse. Again, this was an uncomfortable truth. Human mining techniques were considered dangerous and reckless by galactic standards. They used controlled explosions, high-speed drilling, and what other species called insane risks to extract resources from asteroids and planets. But they got results. The shipping schedules, wailed Transport Minister Veltar of the Commercial Transit Authority. Your cargo haulers carry 40% of all intersystem trade. We don't have enough ships to replace your fleet. Sarah began walking toward the exit, her message delivered. Behind her, the chamber descended further into chaos as representatives realized the scope of what they were losing. Wait, Zeltior called after her. What about the border patrols? Your ships guard the outer rim territories. Sarah paused at the chamber entrance. This was perhaps the most telling complaint of all. For decades, the Council had been content to let human ships patrol the dangerous frontier regions, areas that other species considered too risky or too unprofitable to defend. Human vessels had kept the trade routes safe, driven off pirates, and maintained order in regions the Council had all but abandoned. "Find someone else to do your dirty work," she said, without turning around. As Sarah left the chamber, she could hear the arguments beginning. Representatives were already blaming each other, pointing fingers and demanding solutions that didn't exist. The truth was, the galaxy had become dependent on humanity without even realizing it. Humans didn't just contribute to galactic society, they had become its backbone. They fixed problems other species didn't know how to solve, went places other species wouldn't go, and did jobs other species considered beneath them. And now, they were leaving. The communication reached Earth within hours. The Galaxy Council was calling emergency sessions. Representatives were demanding explanations, offering concessions, threatening sanctions that no one could enforce. But it was too late. Humanity had made its choice. Across the galaxy, human colonies began the Great Withdrawal. Ships that had patrolled forgotten sectors turned toward home. Scientists packed up research that had taken decades to develop. Engineers shut down networks that had connected civilizations across the stars. The galaxy was about to. 3 weeks after Ambassador Chen's announcement, the first major failure occurred in the Centauri trade corridor. The main communication relay, responsible for coordinating shipping traffic across 17 star systems, went completely silent. Captain Velshan of the Altarian merchant vessel, Stellar Pride, was the first to notice something wrong. His ship had been waiting for clearance to dock at Centauri Station for over 6 hours, an unheard-of delay in what was usually the most efficiently run trade route in the galaxy. "Communications Officer Zeph," he called across the bridge, his forearms working the navigation controls with practiced ease. "Try the emergency frequencies." Zeph, a young Altarian fresh from the Navigation Academy, manipulated his console with increasingly frantic movements. "Nothing, Captain. The entire relay network appears to be down." Velshan felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. "Check the backup systems." "That's what I've been trying to tell you, sir," Zeph replied, his voice cracking with stress. "There are no backup systems. The humans maintained everything. They never trained anyone else on the repair protocols." Around them, space traffic began to cluster as more ships arrived without proper coordination. The Stellar Pride found itself part of a growing crowd of vessels, all waiting for clearance that would never come. Meanwhile, on Centauri Station, Station Commander Krixtal was discovering the true scope of the problem. The massive space station, which served as a hub for hundreds of thousands of travelers and traders daily, was slowly falling apart. "Ma'am," reported Chief Engineer Blort, a stocky member of the Dwarven Collective, "the atmospheric processors are operating at 60% efficiency and dropping. The human maintenance crews took all their diagnostic equipment when they left." Krixtal's mandibles clicked with anxiety. She was one of the few station commanders who had always respected human capabilities, but even she hadn't realized how deeply integrated they had become into essential systems. "What about the Dwarven engineering teams? Surely they can maintain atmospheric processors." "That's just it, Commander," Blort replied, his beard quivering with frustration. "The humans completely redesigned our atmospheric systems 5 years ago. Increased efficiency by 200%, they did. But they built it using human engineering principles. We don't understand half of what they did." The station's artificial gravity began fluctuating in several sectors. Emergency teams rushed to evacuate areas where gravity could suddenly reverse or disappear entirely. What had once been routine maintenance was becoming a series of life-threatening crises. In the medical bay, Dr. Yindar of the Healers Alliance was facing her own nightmare. A cargo hauler accident had brought in dozens of casualties, the kind of complex trauma cases that had become routine since humans had shared their medical techniques. "Nurse Plictar," she called to her assistant, "prepare the synthesis chamber for emergency surgery on the Goliath patient." The young nurse, a member of the amphibious aquarian species, worked his controls with webbed fingers that trembled visibly. "Doctor, the synthesis chamber won't activate. The human medical technicians took all the calibration codes with them." Dr. Yindar stared in horror at the massive form of the injured Goliath. The patient needed immediate surgery to repair internal damage, but without the human-designed equipment, she was limited to traditional Healers Alliance techniques that had a survival rate of perhaps 30% for injuries this severe. "Get me a direct communication line to the Healers Alliance Central Command," she ordered. "Tell them we need emergency medical supplies and traditional surgical equipment. And tell them we need it now." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on thousands of worlds and stations. The withdrawal of human personnel was revealing the uncomfortable truth about galactic civilization. It had become entirely dependent on human innovation and expertise. On the industrial world of Pharos Prime, the massive mining operations that supplied raw materials to 17 systems ground to a halt. The human-designed extraction equipment required constant adjustment and maintenance, work that demanded an understanding of controlled explosions, high-pressure drilling, and what the Safety Commission had always called reckless disregard for proper procedures. Mining Supervisor Gorth of the Rock-Eater clan stood in the main control room watching his screens display failure after failure. Each of his extraction sites was reporting the same problem: equipment shutdowns they couldn't fix. The humans always said this work was too dangerous for proper safety protocols, he muttered to his assistant, a smaller rock-eater named Pebble. "We thought they were just making excuses for their sloppy methods." "What do we do now?" Pebble asked, his stone-like features creased with worry. "We do what we should have done 50 years ago," Gorth replied grimly. "We learn to do it ourselves. Even if it kills us." But learning human techniques wasn't as simple as reading manuals or watching recordings. Human engineering was based on intuition, improvisation, and a willingness to take risks that other species found terrifying. They built systems that barely met safety standards but exceeded performance requirements by incredible margins. In the Outer Rim territories, the security situation was deteriorating rapidly. The human patrol ships that had kept pirates and raiders at bay were gone, leaving vast stretches of space undefended. Pirate Captain Scrix of the Bloodfang Raiders couldn't believe his luck. For decades, his crew had been forced to operate in the dangerous deep void regions, far from profitable trade routes. Human patrol ships had made raiding in civilized space almost impossible. "Navigation Officer Claw," he called across his ship's bridge, "set course for the Merchant Guild convoy route through the Stellar Gardens. It's time to remind the galaxy what real pirates can do." His crew cheered, anticipating their first major raid in years. The human patrol ships had been replaced by Council Defense Force vessels, but those ships followed predictable patterns, used standard tactics, and most importantly, operated under strict rules of engagement. Human captains had been notorious for ignoring proper procedure when dealing with pirates. They used unpredictable tactics, pursued raiders into dangerous areas other ships wouldn't enter, and had an alarming tendency to shoot first and fill out incident reports later. Council Defense Force ships did everything by the book, which meant pirates could plan around their responses. Meanwhile, in the council chambers on the capital world of Diplomatia, emergency sessions were running around the clock. Representative after representative stood to report new crises, new failures, new disasters that seemed to multiply daily. "The food distribution network for the Spiral Arm colonies has collapsed," reported Agricultural Coordinator Mems of the Farmers Collective. "Human cargo ships carried 60% of all food shipments to the outer territories. We don't have enough vessels to replace them. The exploration missions to the Andromeda Gateway have been suspended indefinitely." added Chief Explorer Rift Tar of the Discovery Institute. Human scout ships were the only vessels capable of navigating the unstable wormhole network. 3 separate conflicts have erupted in former human patrol zones, announced General Thax grimly. The Rimward rebels are mobilizing, the Pirate Confederacy is expanding their territory, and 2 trade wars have turned into shooting wars. Council Prime Zelthior sat in his command chair, his 4 arms holding his head in a gesture of despair. In just 3 weeks, the galaxy had begun falling apart. Systems that had run smoothly for decades were failing. Trade routes that had been safe were becoming battlegrounds. Technologies that had revolutionized galactic life were becoming useless without human expertise. "What about our attempts to contact the Human Federation?" he asked wearily. "All communication attempts have been blocked," replied Communications Director Srell. "They've erected some kind of interference field around all human space. Our messages aren't getting through." The truth was even worse than they knew. Humanity hadn't just withdrawn, they had effectively disappeared. Human space was now protected by advanced defensive technologies that made it impossible for outside ships to enter or even send messages. Dr. Krelar of the Healers Alliance stood to address the council, her usual composure replaced by visible distress. "The medical situation is becoming critical. Human trauma treatment techniques were integrated into every major medical facility in the galaxy. We're seeing mortality rates climbing toward pre-contact levels. The Gateway Network is operating at 12% capacity," added Network Administrator Pulse of the Communication Guild. "We've lost contact with entire sectors. Some colonies may not even know about the human withdrawal yet." Senator Korval of the Draconian Empire rose slowly, his reptilian features showing an emotion rarely seen in his species: fear. "Perhaps it's time we admitted the truth. We didn't just lose valuable allies when the humans left. We lost the foundation of our civilization." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. No one had wanted to say it, but everyone knew it was true. "How long before total system collapse?" Zelthior asked quietly. Chief Analyst Void of the Predictive Sciences Institute consulted her datapad with tentacles that shook slightly. "At current rates of failure, 6 months until major population centers begin experiencing life support failures. 12 months until the trade network collapses entirely. 18 months until we're back to pre-space age technology levels in the outer territories. And if we can't restore the communication network? Some colonies will be completely cut off within weeks. They'll never know what happened." Zelthior closed his eyes, a gesture of despair common to many species. The Galaxy Council had always prided itself on its wisdom, its ability to maintain peace and prosperity across thousands of worlds. Now they were facing the possibility that their entire civilization would collapse because one species had decided they didn't want to participate anymore. "Options?" he asked desperately. "We could try to reverse engineer human technologies," suggested Chief Scientist Probe of the Research Collective. "But our initial analysis suggests it would take decades to fully understand even their basic systems." "What about forced reintegration?" asked General Thax. "Military action to compel their return." The chamber erupted in horrified gasps. The idea of forcing a member species to remain in the council was so fundamentally against galactic law that suggesting it bordered on treason. "Even if we could," added Security Chief Sharp of the Intelligence Division, "human military capabilities were always concerning. Their ships are faster, their weapons more innovative, and their tactics completely unpredictable. Any military action would likely result in our defeat." The brutal truth was settling over the assembled representatives like a suffocating blanket. They had treated humanity as junior partners, tolerated their methods rather than respected them, and dismissed their contributions as crude but lucky accidents. Now they were learning that those crude methods and lucky accidents had been holding their entire civilization together, and without them, Everything was falling apart. Outside the council chambers across the galaxy, billions of beings were beginning to understand what their leaders were only now admitting. The humans hadn't just been useful members of galactic society, they had been absolutely essential, and now they were gone. Learn what it really meant to lose humanity, and the lesson would be more devastating than anyone could imagine. 6 months after the human withdrawal, Ambassador Kethrall of the Peaceful Trader Coalition stood in what had once been the bustling central marketplace of Harmony Station. Now it was a ghost town, with empty vendor stalls and darkened shop windows stretching as far as the eye could see. The station's population had dropped from 12 million beings to barely 300,000. Without the human-maintained trade networks, shipping costs had increased by over 400%. Without human medical facilities, many species could no longer safely travel to multi-species stations. Without human communications technology, many traders had simply lost contact with their suppliers entirely. "Show me the status reports," Kethrall said to her aide, a young member of her own species whose tentacles drooped with exhaustion. "Sector 12 has been completely abandoned," the aide reported. "The life support systems failed 3 weeks ago, and we don't have the personnel to repair them. Sectors 7 through 11 are on emergency power only." Kethrall nodded grimly. This was the same story across the galaxy. Stations that had housed millions were being gradually abandoned as systems failed and couldn't be repaired. Worlds that had been connected to galactic civilization were falling back into isolation. The irony wasn't lost on her. For millennia, the Galaxy Council had prided itself on bringing civilization to backward species, on connecting primitive worlds to the greater galactic community. Now, that same community was fragmenting back into isolated pockets of barely functioning technology. "Any word from the reconstruction efforts?" Her aide consulted his datapad with trembling tentacles. "The Dwarven Collective has managed to restore basic atmospheric processing on 17 stations. The Healers Alliance has developed new medical protocols that have reduced mortality rates to only 3 times pre-human levels. The Explorers Consortium has successfully mapped 12 new trade routes to replace the ones we've lost access to." All of this sounded positive, but Kethrall knew the real numbers. Before the human withdrawal, the galaxy had over 40,000 active space stations. 17 functional stations was not progress. It was barely survival. What about the military situation? Getting worse daily. The Pirate Confederacy now controls almost 30% of former Council space. The Rimward Rebellion has declared independence and is raiding Council supply convoys. 3 separate trade wars have escalated into actual wars. Without human patrol ships, the galaxy had become a much more dangerous place. Council Defense Force vessels were well-trained and well-equipped, but they followed predictable patterns and operated under strict rules of engagement. Pirates and raiders had quickly learned to exploit these limitations. Human patrol ships had been different. They appeared where they weren't expected, used tactics that weren't in any military manual, and had an alarming tendency to pursue enemies into areas other ships wouldn't dare enter. More importantly, human captains had been authorized to use their own judgment in dealing with threats, rather than waiting for orders from Central Command. Now, with human ships gone, lawless elements were expanding their territory at an unprecedented rate. On the Council world of Diplomatia, an emergency session was debating the most desperate proposal in galactic history. The chamber was only half full now. Many species had withdrawn their representatives to deal with local crises, while others had simply lost the ability to maintain contact with the central government. "The proposal before us is simple," announced Council Prime Zelthior, his voice carrying none of its former authority. "We surrender." The word hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several representatives visibly recoiled from their translation devices, as if the machines had malfunctioned. "We formally acknowledge that the Galaxy Council was wrong to censure human actions at Kepler Station," Zelthior continued. We officially recognize that human methods, while unconventional, were essential to galactic civilization. We publicly apologize for our treatment of humanity and formally request their return to the Council. Senator Corval of the Draconian Empire rose slowly, his reptilian features showing the strain of recent months. And if they refuse, then we continue to collapse until there's nothing left to govern. The proposal passed by a unanimous vote, though many representatives noted that it was essentially meaningless. They still had no way to contact humanity. Human space remained sealed behind defensive barriers that no council ship could penetrate. Unknown to the galactic community, their desperate messages were being received. Deep within human space, on the heavily defended world of New Geneva, the Human Federation Council was monitoring every transmission from the outside galaxy. President Maria Santos sat in the Situation Room, watching reports flow in from automated monitoring stations positioned at the edge of human space. The data painted a picture of accelerating collapse that was both satisfying and disturbing. The latest intelligence shows complete breakdown in the Centauri sector, reported Intelligence Director James Park. 15 major stations have been abandoned. 3 colonies have lost contact with their home governments. Pirate activity has increased by 700% in former patrol zones. Casualties? Asked President Santos. Difficult to estimate, but probably in the millions. Medical system failures alone have caused massive mortality increases. That's not counting deaths from pirate raids, system failures, or starvation due to supply chain collapse. President Santos felt a familiar mixture of vindication and guilt. This was what they had wanted, wasn't it? Proof that humanity was essential, not just tolerated. Evidence that their contributions had been critical, not merely helpful. But watching entire civilizations collapse was harder than she had expected. Any word from the diplomatic team? Foreign Minister Chen Wei, Sarah's sister, activated her holographic display. We've received over 3,000 formal apologies from various council species. The official surrender document arrived this morning, along with requests for emergency aid, technological assistance, and immediate restoration of communication networks. What are our options? Defense Minister Admiral Torres leaned forward in his chair. We could maintain isolation indefinitely. Our defensive networks are holding perfectly. No council ship has even come close to penetrating human space. But President Santos sensed there was more. But complete isolation has costs too. We're cut off from resources we used to obtain through trade. We're missing opportunities for scientific advancement through cooperation. And he paused, looking uncomfortable. Frankly, some of our people are questioning whether we're doing the right thing. This was the argument that had been raging in human space for months. The withdrawal had been designed to prove a point, to show the galaxy what they were losing. It had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. The question now was what to do with that victory. Options for re-engagement? Santos asked. We could restore limited communication networks, suggested Communications Director Liu. Let them know we're still alive and monitoring the situation. We could provide emergency humanitarian aid, added Medical Director Okonkwo. Medical supplies, food shipments, basic technological assistance, but no personnel, no permanent presence. Or we could return on our own terms, said Foreign Minister Chen. Full recognition of human autonomy, no more safety commissions or procedural reviews, complete integration of human methods into galactic standards, and a permanent human seat on the Security Committee. President Santos considered each option carefully. The complete collapse of galactic civilization hadn't been their goal, merely proof of their importance. But the proof had come at a terrible cost. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, individual species were beginning to develop their own solutions. The Dwarven Collective had started reverse engineering human mining equipment, accepting that their safety-first approach would have to give way to human-style controlled risks. The Healers Alliance was training doctors in human trauma techniques, even though the methods seemed barbarically direct compared to their gentle healing traditions. The Explorers Consortium had begun adopting human navigation methods, using intuition and improvisation instead of careful calculation and detailed planning. Their success rate was lower, but they were covering territory faster than ever before. Most surprisingly, the younger generation of various species was embracing human approaches with enthusiasm. They had grown up with human-influenced technology and human-trained instructors. To them, the reckless human methods weren't dangerous. They were simply more effective. On the Altarian homeworld, young engineer Slicks was leading a team trying to restore their planetary communication grid using copied human techniques. Traditional Altarian engineering called for months of planning, careful simulations, and extensive safety reviews. Slicks's team was building as they went, testing modifications in real time, and accepting that some failures were inevitable. "The power coupling is unstable," reported his assistant, Technician Rix. "Traditional protocols require a full system shutdown for repairs." "What would humans do?" Slicks asked, a question that had become common among young engineers. "They'd probably reroute power through the backup systems, fix it while it's running, and worry about safety regulations afterward." "Then that's what we do." It worked. The communication grid was restored in 2 days instead of 2 months. The approach would have horrified safety inspectors, but there were no safety inspectors left to complain. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy as necessity forced species to adopt human methods. They were learning that controlled risk was better than paralyzed caution, that improvisation could be more valuable than careful planning, and that sometimes the best solution was the one that barely worked rather than the one that perfectly followed regulations. But these lessons came too late for many. Entire sectors had already fallen into darkness. Colonies that had depended on human-maintained supply lines were facing starvation. The great trade networks that had connected civilizations for millennia had collapsed into isolated fragments. Back on New Geneva, President Santos made her decision. "We make contact," she announced to the assembled Federation Council. "Limited engagement, humanitarian focus. We let them know we're still here and willing to help with the worst crises." "Terms?" asked Admiral Torres. "No apologies required from us. No admissions of wrongdoing. We help because we choose to, not because we're obligated to." She paused, looking around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. "And we make it clear that any future relationship will be as equals, not as junior partners tolerated by their betters." The decision to re-establish limited contact would change everything. But both humanity and the galaxy had learned valuable lessons during the months of separation. The galaxy had learned what it meant to lose human innovation and courage. Humanity had learned that isolation, while satisfying in the short term, came with costs they weren't entirely comfortable paying. The future relationship between humanity and galactic civilization would be very different from what had come before. There would be no more safety commissions ruling human methods too dangerous, no more procedural reviews of human innovations. No more assumption that humans should be grateful for inclusion in galactic society. Instead, there would be recognition that humanity brought something unique and essential to the galaxy. Their willingness to take risks, to improvise solutions, to do whatever was necessary to solve problems had become the foundation upon which galactic civilization rested. The humans were coming back, but this time, they would return as the leaders they had always been, rather than the junior partners they had been treated as. The galaxy would never be the same.